Sienna, can you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about your journey, and I'm gonna go off and come right back while you're doing that.
No worries. Thank you, Hunter.
All
And again,
right.
I'm excited to dive in because I think how we all are able to, number one, understand, identify, and then foster our own personal leadership styles is one of the most empowering and impactful thing that we can do, not just as professionals, but as individuals overall. So Hunter had kicked us off asking me a little bit about my journey towards leadership. And it was funny because for context, I am from the US, so I'm from New York, but I've actually been living in Spain since 2014, so for about a decade. And when I think about leadership, and this is similar to what Gonzalo had shared in the past session, but leadership is not only the way that you work, but it's also the way that you connect with others, the way that you're able to have a deeper understanding of who you're working with, why you're working with them, what drives them, and then also what is it that they value as an individual. So when I think about my leadership journey specifically, I found a report card from my third grade teacher, and she was like, Sienna's a great leader. She's able to lead her individuals, but she only really shares her opinion without giving space for others. And it was interesting because that was something that I learned at a very young age of leadership isn't only being able to have power or influence, but leadership is being able to understand who is it that you have around you, what is it that motivates them, and how can you bridge that gap. So really thinking through, and again over the years, I'm currently our senior director of talent experience at PowerToFly, but before this, I've started and run my own global organization as well, where I was able to lead over, I'm gonna say 50,000 individuals to help them be able to move to different countries and grow, being able to get new remote work opportunities. In addition, I've been in the co-living and digital nomad spaces as a leader there as well. I've given TEDx talks at the age of 24. The list goes on. While all of that is exciting, the one thing that I've learned is, again, it's not about who you are as a leader, but it's about how you want to connect with other individuals as a leader. And so when we think about this also, because we are at our EMEA and UK summit, one of the things that I think has been able to give me the best perspective is the way that I'm able, there's a stat that talks about when we're able to have calm nervous systems, we're able to lead better. So when I think about leadership, it's not about reactivity, it's not about doing the most, but instead it's being able to say, how can we find our inner peace and our power to be able to lead intentionally? And so when I think about leading with intention, that's really being able to say, how are we also able to do the healing work that we need? Hey, Hunter, to be able to do the healing work that we need to show up in a way that's intentional, that's not harmful, and instead that's supporting to those that we're looking to work and learn from and grow with. And so that was a little bit of a long story and introduction to my leadership journey. But now that Hunter's back, we're excited to have you. I'll have you dive into the
Happy to
next
be
question.
here. Thank you. This is teamwork makes the dream work, friends. This is how it works. I loved that, we can just take care of each other. And that's how we do it. Okay, so I'm glad that they got the long version because I'm sure it wasn't long enough because you are such a fascinating person.
Mhm.
And again, I love talking to you. So let's talk about the topic at hand. What do you see as the differences between being a leader and being a manager?
Oof, 100%. Okay, so again, I think leadership is how you move through the world. Being a manager is what your title is, right? So when we think about it, we've all seen individuals in those organizations who can influence others, who can start something from the ground up, who are willing to get their hands dirty and work with other individuals, where oftentimes a manager is just a role, right? We often view managers, and unfortunately, we're in a time where it's like our toxic manager who's micromanaging us and really just not allowing for us to be able to have a space in the workplace where we can thrive as individuals, where I really view a leader as someone who's able to, again, understand who it is that they're working with, being able to take the responsibility that as a leader, it's our job to adapt to the needs of the diverse folks that we're leading, right? And diversity shows up in a lot of different ways, but a leader is someone who's really able to take a step back and think strategically, someone who's able to be open to change and to innovation. And also, and again, I think this is one of the most important factors, but a leader, I think one of the most important aspects of leadership as well is how can we also take care of ourselves? Because leaders
Hmm.
are often pouring from empty cups because they're trying to take care of everyone else. But again, if we're not able to maintain a sentiment of calm in the chaos or cultivate what is my inner peace, how am I tapping into my own inner power, it can sometimes move us from being a leader to just saying, how am I being a manager and getting the job done versus how am I being a leader and creating other leaders along the journey, right? So I really believe and value that. I think about this in my life and in a lot of the things that I do, but the best leaders are able to cultivate and create other leaders as well because you give them the space to grow. You give them the tools and the resources that they need, and you also understand what is their path that they're looking to go on because it might be different, right? All of us as leaders and individuals, we have different ideas of what quote unquote success look like, but how do we actually create the time and the space to know what success looks like for the folks that you're leading in your teams, in your community, in your families, in your friend groups across the board, and then being able to understand how can we bridge that gap and support one another in that growth.
Yeah, you gotta pay it forward, right? And I think what's also beautiful about helping other people become leaders is it makes us better leaders, right? Because it is also a mirror of what are some of the best things that have worked for us. And then
Mm.
also there can be realize maybe sometimes like, oh, I'm giving advice that I should be doing right now as well, right?
Absolutely. But again, and I want to touch on that, Hunter, just because I think it's really important, right? In the same way we're in our relationships, we have mirrors of we think we're doing great stuff. I'm a goddess, everything's fantastic. But then it's like when you have, excuse me, when you have the honesty of how can we also give you critical feedback? How can we
Mhm.
also help you grow? It's the same way in leadership. And so it's really important to have an open door policy, not having an open door policy, but actually creating the trust and the psychological safety so that the people that you lead can also help you grow. Because again, we live in our own bubbles with our own perspectives and with our own projections of things, but instead really being able to create a safe space where you're also open to feedback so that you can grow as a leader for the folks that you're trying to lead as well.
Oh my gosh, so much in there, right? Psychological safety, how to give and receive feedback. Those are obviously very interconnected. Can you
Yeah.
give us some pro tips of psychological safety and feedback specifically, giving and receiving?
Yeah. I love this. Okay, so and again, I want to take a step back just because I talk a lot about leading with intention. I have a podcast on leading with intention. Intention has become a
What's
huge
it called? What's the
buzzword.
podcast called?
Leading with intention.
There it is. Ha!
There we
We
go.
love it.
Easy, Google it, check it out. But I think it's funny because intention has become something that's such a buzzword, right? We're all
Yeah.
trying to do things with intentionality, but the actual one of the actual definitions of intention is the healing process of a wound. And no one really leans into that, but I think it's so important because if we do not heal the wounds that we have, whether it's from childhood, whether it's from past relationships, whether it's from toxic bosses, whatever that might be,
All of
we're
the above for
not,
me. Triple
yeah.
winner.
I think we've all had, it's true though, because I think all great leaders have done the work to heal what they need to so
Right.
that they can show up, right? And so if
Right.
we're thinking about communication, inclusive communication, all of it, it also has to do with putting our ego to the side, right?
Mhm.
Not really focusing on the power or the privilege that you may hold as a leader, but instead being able to say, I am still a student. I'm open to learning and I'm open to growing. And when your employees or the people on your team or in your community see that vulnerability where you don't feel like you always have to have it together, where it doesn't need to be perfect, it creates an opportunity for them to also reflect that. And so that's something that I always really value in the way that I lead of if I'm having a horrible day because my dog peed inside and like my day didn't start the way that I needed it to, whatever it is, I name that, right? If I'm showing up in a meeting and I know that I might be feeling a little defensive because of a conversation that I had outside of work, I name that. This way, if I'm showing up in a way that's not in alignment with my highest self or my favorite self, whatever you want to call it, I'm really actually able to create space for others to then show up as well. Because again,
Mm.
oftentimes, especially in work relationships, there's a lot of projection that happens that then our employees take on. So if I'm showing up and I'm acting in a way that's projecting my own fears or worries or insecurities, then the individuals that I'm leading see that and they're not able to meet me where they're at because they're afraid of what might those repercussions be. And so again, I really think that the healing part of leadership is something that's essential, but then also the sentiment of awareness, of actually knowing yourself, who you are, your visions and your values, and then staying true to those no matter the spaces that you're occupying.
Oh my gosh. Also, so much in there. We could pick apart every every response with 10 more questions and follow-ups. So give me some practical tips about naming it. I love this. So when you say you name that, is that for you? Is that a shared naming, like in the room? What does that actually look like?
Oh, absolutely. So again, I'm a very transparent person, and I think, and again, I was like, I'll have my teammates speak for me, but I think I'm a very transparent person. And so when I say naming that, number one, it's having the honesty with myself for that self-awareness of like, I'm feeling a little angry today, or I might be sad about something. And I know that that's going to impact the way that I move through the world because I'm human, as we all are. So I think number one is how can you name for yourself where you are, either in your journey or how you are emotionally, whatever that might be. Number two, how can you name that again in the spaces where you feel comfortable and in the spaces where you
Hmm.
feel like there's a sentiment of trust? Because again, not everyone deserves to have your full transparency. We also have to protect our own emotional tax and labor, but in the spaces where you're able to cultivate that, and again, which is why as a leader representing that is almost even more important than having your employees or your teams or communities do that. And then the third thing is thinking through the way that you have your delivery. Oh my goodness, right? So if I'm having a hard day, I'm not going to go into a meeting and say, everything sucks. I'm really annoyed, but
Right.
it's like, hey, team, I had a rough morning this morning. I just want to name that because it might impact the way that I'm giving feedback or it might impact that. I'm going to do the best in my ability to handle my own emotions and not project that onto your work. But I just want to name that if I'm not showing up in the best way, there's that context. Which again, I think you have to figure out what is your personal leadership style. I think because again, I've had a lot of years practicing and honing my leadership style. I feel very comfortable doing that, but figuring out where do you feel ready? What are some
Mm.
small ways that you can kind of start testing the self-awareness, but then also the accountability as well. And that goes back to what we were talking about with feedback, right? Of like, how can we start practicing being more open to being held accountable, right? Both by ourselves and then also by the people that we interact with. But when someone holds you accountable, not getting defensive. When someone holds you accountable, not pushing back or spinning it around on them, but being
Hmm.
able to have that self-awareness and say, okay, thank you for mentioning this to me. I want to do better. What is it that you need? Right? Because again, as leaders, and we're going to see this and hear this from a lot of the amazing speakers that we have today, you have a different sentiment of responsibility, of ownership, and then again of privilege and power where other people might not be in the room. So it's almost our own, it's our responsibility to be able to say, how are we practicing the hard things that we would like to see from those that we're leading in the same way versus having the expectations, but then also not showing up or holding ourselves accountable as well.
Yeah. I love earlier what you were saying. Not everyone deserves the right to, what was the exact wording? It was so good.
Yeah, not everyone deserves the right for your transparency because again, when we think about psychological safety as well,
Yeah. Because that's for us too,
yeah,
psychological
exactly.
safety as a team
Exactly.
leader. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think again, it's like creating and building psychological safety has to be a two-way street, right?
Hmm.
So it has to be a way of saying we're in relationships. So it's like a dance. How are we able to move back and forth and then build trust with one another? But then once that trust is built, continuing to foster it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got about 10 minutes left. We have a question from the chat. This person is saying, in transitioning into leadership or managerial role, how can we ensure that we maintain the strong relationship we've built with our colleagues? And I think I'll lead into this a little bit. Sometimes when we transition out of these roles, we're no longer peers we now are maybe speaking to our friends, former peers, that now we're telling them what to do. We're telling them maybe how to improve and how to do it. And that can be a bit of a transitional moment. How do we do that?
Yeah. No, I love this question. And just for context as well, so I've lived through this where I actually started off as an individual contributor. I've been a senior director for about 2.5 years. So going through the process of what happens when you're doing the work, you have the people that you're working with, and then you become their manager. I don't like the word manager, but then you become their manager or their leader. How do you maintain that trust? And
Mm,
I think it really again goes back to you are still the same person, right? So if you're still living and working in those same values, it shouldn't shift that much your interactions, right? Granted, you might now have to be approving different things or telling them yes and no, but it goes back to I'll start with this. Something that I always do, whether I'm leading a new team, hiring someone onto my team, or restructuring the way that we're doing things, is
mm,
asking and seeing what it is that people would like to see from you. Because when we're able to have those expectations, it allows for us then as leaders to understand and adapt to that, right? Whether that's through a survey that you do, whether that's through having a group conversation, always setting that boundaries of like, hey, what is it that you would like to see from me as a leader? What is it that you respect and value? And in that same way, I'm able to say, here's what I respect and value as a new leader for those that I work with. So again, we're able to have both sides of information and then figure out how do we want to bridge the gap, right? One side might need to move more than the other as we're starting out. And then again, it goes back and forth as a dance, but I think having those conversations is one of the easiest and most direct ways to be able to get there. But then also being able to say, if you have strong relationships with your colleagues already, which is what it sounds like from the question, continue maintaining those. But again, thinking about it as how can you lead them, not how can you manage or micromanage them, right?
mm.
So there's a way to lead the conversations, there's a way to deliver hard news that you might not have had to deliver before. But again,
Yeah.
always thinking through how do you understand who you're working with or collaborating with in any sense. And then also really just taking a step back and saying, how can you also show up to be able to meet their needs, obviously within limitations. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that relationships need to change because you're now in a new position of power, but almost seeing it as again, a benefit or something that stands out. So like, why am I able to be a better leader than what I might have been X years ago? Because I've done all of the groundwork. I was with the clients. I've had the hard conversations, so I know where folks are at, which means
Yeah.
that I'm now able to advocate for them even better because I'm in a higher sense of power or privilege. And so again, I think it gives you a benefit to whoever had asked that question of, you've been in the weeds and you know what it's like. And so keeping that in mind as you're now stepping into a new place or in a new transition in your career as well, as you're starting to advocate and support your team in rooms that they might not necessarily be in.
Yeah. I love too that the idea of that your relationship doesn't necessarily have to change in a big way if you have been being like an authentic person previously as well. And authenticity is another buzzword, but you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like showing
Yeah.
up with that vulnerability, with these tools that you're talking about when
Yeah.
you're peers, then that translates, right, to your
Exactly.
leadership role. Because then you're still the same person. Like you said, you're not suddenly like, I'm the manager, I got to act like a
Yes.
manager. You're like, well, you're just Sienna, and now you have these responsibilities
Yeah.
um, in a different capacity, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's, I love
So,
being in.
friends, we have 10 more, less than 5 minutes. Oh my goodness, where does the time
Last
go?
questions. Go.
Last questions, burning desires, if not now, when, my friends? Um, so Sienna, I have, a chock full of questions left
Yeah.
over. We never get to all of them. We need to hold an all-day summit, clearly, just you. But in these last 5, 6 minutes, what would you like to talk about? What do you want to focus on? And let's get into it.
Yeah.
What do you want to leave folks with?
Yeah, I guess, and again, if anyone has a final question, we will, but I guess when we're thinking about how can you really hone your leadership style and leave your legacy, I'll leave you with three different tips and things to think about, right? And again, it's almost like a framework that I've created over the years, but going back to how can you create the time and space within your day and within your life to do not just the work that you need to professionally, but to do that personal work as well, right? I think we live in a society where it's go, go, go. We need to be reactive. We need to be doing all of the things. And that's where a lot of folks almost miss the mark because, again, I don't have the stats with me right now, but when you have a calm nervous system, you're able to be
Mm,
a better leader. So, how can you
hmm.
make sure that you're centering your well being, centering your mental health, and creating circumstances that work for you so that you can show up and lead even more intentionally? The second bucket that I'll talk about is again, that self awareness of being open to feedback and being self aware of how you're showing up as a leader. Continuing to have those conversations where you're able to make connections with your colleagues and with your employees to understand not only how you view them and their work, but also that upward feedback as well, right? How can I do better? What do you need from me? And consistently having those touch points and being open to listening to that feedback. And then the third thing that I would say is again, accountability, right? Because a lot of the times you might have a title or you might be in a role where you can just do the things and not have accountability. But I think it's that self accountability of, am I doing the best that I can? And then that second part is, how am I having accountability if I do cause harm to a team member? How am I having the accountability if I don't meet my goals? How am I having the accountability if I'm not showing up in that alignment as a leader, and really making sure that you're honing into that and then being open to do the work. So I say, no matter what your role is, no matter how long you've been leading, no matter what space you're leading in, continuing to have a student type mindset where you're open to learning, you're open to growing, and you're open to really dedicating the time and the energy to make those changes to help you show up as not only a better leader, but as a better individual as well.
That's beautiful. I love it because it's self-growth on all capacities, right? I love
Yeah.
you're talking about that student mindset and you're talking about this growth and mindfulness. It's the beginner's mind, right? There is
Yeah.
always more to learn. We don't know everything. We can be
Exactly.
humble and admit we don't know something. That's one of my favorite things to do because then I get to learn something new.
It's so true. Oh, really quickly, and the last thing that I just will add, and like I think that this is one of my favorite things, and this is an exercise that anyone who's in the audience can do right now, but I view specifically as a leader, creating teams, creating communities, whatever that is, as a puzzle, right?
Mm,
Everyone has their own zones of genius, expertise, experience, communication styles, etc. And so I view my job as a leader of really being able to say, how do we make the puzzle pieces fit? But then also, how do we allow for people to thrive at what they're great at? Right. So instead of trying to do all of the things, it's like pause. Who are the people that I'm working with? Where is their brilliance? And then how can either they partner together to learn from one another and strengthen the skills that might not be their zone of genius? And also, how can I take a step back to also learn from their zone of genius as well? And so I think really all of you, whether you're just starting off your leadership journey or whether you've been a leader for some time, I really encourage you to think through and hold some exercises within your team to understand not only what are their skills and their strengths, but then also what do they value, and then take time to look at all of the different puzzle pieces and say, how can we all make it fit so that we can make a beautiful piece of art?
oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. And I love Zone of Genius. That's one that I'm
Yeah.
really a big fan of. That's a paradigm phrase that I learned this year. And I'm like, ooh, ooh, yes, yes, tell me more. And then you gotta let people live in their zone of genius, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like let go of trying to control how they're going to do it for a little while because we don't know what the outcome is going to be. As long as they're doing it in a healthy way, if it's different than the way you would have done it, you got to let
Exactly.
that bird fly, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And I also think, again, it's like, I don't want to say it's giving folks the benefit of the doubt because ideally there wouldn't be no doubt. You trust the people who you have on your teams, but giving also people time and space to grow as well, right?
Yeah.
I think also we're living in a world where there's a lot of changes within organizations or within the world as in general, and so people are adapting, right? People are
Hmm.
adapting. People are also still learning and growing, and so giving folks the space and opportunity to be beginners as well, because who knows, once you give them that space, they might create or foster a new zone of genius that you didn't know that they had and that they might not have known that they had. But giving those opportunities for individuals to be able to grow is another really great tool. And with that, I know we're at time, Hunter.
We're at time.
And
What's the
time
best way to stay in
managing for
touch?
us.
Thank you, timekeeper. What's the best way to stay connected before we log off with you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Hunter. And so thank you everyone for watching today, or if you're watching afterwards, you can find me on LinkedIn at Sienna J. Brown, on Instagram at Sienna J. Brown. Feel free to check out my podcast, Leading with Intention. And of course, come to Power to Fly, join our community so you can continue staying in touch with these amazing leadership conversations that you'll see today and throughout. So thank you, Hunter. I appreciate you, and I'm
I
excited
appreciate you
to see more
so,
coming
so
next.
much. Always, always, and forever. All right, Sienna,
Thank you.
enjoy whatever beautiful weather is happening in that tank top and that beautiful light. I appreciate that part for you as well.
Oh, thank you. It's part of me being a good leader, being able to
Hey,
live in Spain and have sunshine in April. So thank you. I'm excited for all of you to listen into Lee Moore and Hunter, and have a great day.
yeah, you too. Bye now.